First of all, on behalf of the Danube Institute, may I welcome you to this conference on the life and work of the great Anglo-Hungarian economist Peter Bauer. I have to follow it up rather prosaically with a public service announcement, which is, please turn off your phones. And secondly, I have to say you cannot take photographs for security reasons in this room. So if you could observe both of those rules, we would all be very grateful. Secondly, I will not, on this occasion, talk about the Danube Institute, but I will simply say that I am its president, and we are very grateful here today for the other sponsors who've helped us arrange this event. And I'll just mention a few. I'll just mention them. They are, of course, the British Embassy here in Budapest, which gave a reception for the speakers last night and which is represented here today. I think that the reasons for this are fairly plain. Peter Bauer was one of the outstanding members of an already distinguished Hungarian diaspora in England, and he contributed enormously to the good relations between the two countries. I would also like to thank the Friends of Hungary, whose president, Sylvester Vízi, has been active in helping to arrange this event, and whose managing director, Ursula Kalachai, is, I think, present here, will be here during the day. I'd like to thank in particular, of course, the director of the Bruno Leone Institute, an outstanding Italian think tank on mainly economic but other questions in Milan, who is represented here and who will, by one of the speakers, Dr. Alberto Mingardi, who will be speaking to us later this morning. And of course, above all, I would like to thank the governor of the Bank of Hungary and his colleagues at the bank for their hospitality on this occasion. This is, in fact, the second time in which the bank has been hospitable to us. We're extremely grateful. The first was an occasion in which we welcomed another of today's speakers a few years ago, namely President Václav Klaus, the former president of the Czech Republic, and I'm glad that he is again speaking with us today. In order that he may, so that the bank may express its own welcome to you, may I introduce Daniel Palotai, who is the deputy of the governor and who will say a few words. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, President, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, let me convey to you the regret of Governor Matolcsi, who unfortunately, due to other commitments, cannot attend the conference today. And allow me please to say a few words on behalf of the Magyar Nemzeti Bank, the Central Bank of Hungary. It gives us a great pleasure indeed to welcome you all to this conference on the professional work of Peter Bauer. I would like to thank all participants, namely the Friends of Hungary, for taking the time to participate at this event, of course, and also the organizers of this conference, the Danube Institute, the Friends of Hungary Foundation, the British Embassy, the Bruno Leone Institute of Milan. Let me also welcome the speakers of the conference, especially President Václav Klaus, former President of the Czech Republic. The conference today is about the work of Peter Bauer. So let us briefly look on his legacy. Peter Bauer is a distinguished Anglo-Hungarian conservative economist whose distinction is better known outside the country. He was a significant figure at the London School of Economics. He authored a number of books on the subject of development economics. Peter Bauer also received a peerage in recognition of his work, and his unorthodox ideas on a range of economic questions have increasingly become accepted also internationally. As a result of this event, his professional work can be more widely recognized. Nearly all of his contributions concerned development economics, international development, and foreign aid. He saw that central planning, foreign aid, price controls, and protectionism perpetuate poverty rather than eliminate it. Over the years, Lord Bauer and his allies brought about a shift in the priorities of aid-giving institutions like the World Bank. Financing dams went out of fashion. They were replaced by a new emphasis on making developing countries more friendly towards private entrepreneurs by helping them foster an educated, healthy workforce and provide basic infrastructure. Peter Bauer influenced the thinking about the determinants of economic advance, international development, and foreign aid. He wrote several academic studies, including relevant findings such as the following: where people's abilities, motivations, and social and political institutions are favorable, material progress will occur. He also said, where these basic determinants are unfavorable, development will not occur, even with aid. Today, many of Lord Bauer's views on aid and development are part of a new wisdom. He believed that the nature of the country's institutions and the abilities of its people, not an inflow of Western money, is determined in its economic progress. Having had a look at the agenda of this conference, I'm convinced that you are in for inspiring and interesting keynote, lectures, and discussions. I wish all conference participants and organizers a very pleasant and valuable time today. Now let me give the floor back to Mr. John O'Sullivan and wish you a very good conference today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Palatai. I'm grateful to you for a number of reasons, one of which is that because of your excellent summary of the broad outlines of Peter's economic thought, I don't have to repeat those things myself, and I'll focus on other things. But I will say one thing, which is that he certainly was, as you mentioned, in his field, an unorthodox economist. And I gather unorthodoxy is a word not unknown at the bank. But I warn you that unorthodoxy often becomes unorthodoxy over time. So you may find yourself in the ranks of the respectable very soon. Secondly, we have both already thanked people, those organizations and people who helped us, but I want to add my thanks too to yours, to President Klaus, who, in addition to having been the president and a significant statesman in Central Europe, is, of course, himself a distinguished economist and a former president of the Mont Pelerin Society, where a lot of us met for the first time and where I certainly met Peter. Now, I just want to say a few words to flesh out one's feeling about Peter, your understanding of Peter, before we move on to the serious talks. Who was Peter Bauer, and why is he worth celebrating? Well, he was, as we discussed, an unorthodox economist. He became a practicing economist in the full sense at a time when development economics was really only beginning in the 40s and 50s. And he began, as several speakers I think will note, by doing this thorough empirical work on what was the impact on societies in what became known as the Third World of Western investment and economic activity. But he took, as Mr. Palatai has already observed, a very different point of view to those of the Orthodox school. And it's interesting that although he was, even at the time of his death in the early 2000s, still a minority figure, that he looks more and more like a successful predictor, a seer, who could see some of the dangers. I mean, he now has definitely a school of economists who follow him, principally people like William Easterly and Denis Somoyo. But it's also fair to say that he was, that events seem to confirm many of the lessons which he left. Indeed, even before he died, the World Bank had invited him to give advice. He wasn't alone entirely in his life. I mean, there were others who were collaborators with him, most notably Professor Basil Yemi of the London School of Economics, who can't be here, but I will be sending the proceedings of to Professor Yemi at the close of the conference. But he also relied on a number of friendly journalists, Alan Joe Alexander, the late Frank Johnson, and me, to work with him. Working with Peter was an enormously enjoyable occasion. It consisted of going round to see him at his apartment, being given a very good dinner, and then you had to pay for the dinner by sitting down with him and working out the next chapter of his book. And then he would leave you with a glass of port, and you would write this up while he was in the next room reading. Then you would come back to him, and he would critique your success at embodying his thought successfully. This was a lot of fun, because on one occasion, for example, and this is quite typical, he said to me, "What did you think of the dinner tonight?" And I said, "Well, it was a very good dinner, Peter, thank you." He said, "That's not true, you're being polite. It was a terrible dinner." I said, no, it was perfectly fine. He said, "It was a terrible dinner, John. Last year, it would have been an excellent dinner. But my housekeeper has been replaced by a much less good cook, and as a result, I now eat very badly. My standard of living in the past year has declined precipitately. But that is nowhere recorded in the national income statistics." So he was, of course, an empirical economist and suspicious of statistical regularities. He was also a brilliant social critic. As I think Tony Daniels is going to demonstrate to us on questions beyond economics. I remember in particular one of his monograph on the British class system, which he was rather an admirer of, defending it against intellectuals. The title of the pamphlet was "Class on the Brain," and he was adapting a remark of Malcolm Muggeridge, which was that British intellectuals have sex on the brain, which is a very uncomfortable place to have it. And he thought the same was true of social class. That book is a mine of empirical information about people rising and falling in the British class system, as Bernard Shaw called them, upstarts and downstarts. He would say, for example, that one of his collaborators, Frank Johnson, Frank has started in journalism as a tea boy on the Daily Express, and he has since risen to become the deputy editor of a national Sunday newspaper and finally the editor of The Spectator. That was true, and when Frank died, his death, who was a very popular journalist, his death was the third item on the BBC Nightly News. And Peter would say, "It's very hard to imagine a similar career starting today, because he would be told on trying to get a humble position in journalism that he couldn't get it if he hadn't been to a journalism school." And in fact, he decried the rise of credentialism as one of the truly modern evils, truly evil evils of modern life. I've mentioned he was a brilliant teacher. I've mentioned the housekeeper story, but there were many other such stories. He was a great Hungarian. He left an outstanding member of what, as I say, is an outstanding diaspora of Hungarian people in England. And he brought, I think, he brought a great deal to English public life for that reason. And he was a great figure in England's public life. Let me just mention his own rise. He arrived in England in 1934. He spoke no English. He had no influential contacts. He didn't have powerful friends. He simply turned up one day in Cambridge and was told that if he wanted to apply for a college, he should go in, I think on the following day, to the tutors' rooms and simply say, "I would like to come to this college." He applied in this very casual way to something like, I think, 11 colleges. And he was accepted in, I think, 5 or 6. The college of his choice, or college of their choice too, I suppose, was Gonville in Keys. When he was in his first few years there, he was extremely poor. He said to me he lived sometimes for a week or so on potato chips because he simply couldn't afford a great deal. Because he spoke poor English, senior members of the college would tutor him voluntarily so that he could master not only the language but also the subjects in which he was hearing lectures. He did brilliantly and entered the college. In the end of his life, having started in this very difficult way, he was a lifetime fellow of Gonville and Caius. He was Professor of Economics Emeritus at the London School of Economics. He was a Fellow of the British Academy, and he was a member of the House of Lords. I should mention what Peter told me, that when he was seeing Mrs. Thatcher, and she was telling him she was minded to appoint him to the Lords, said he was minded to accept. You have to use these circumlocutions because prime ministers can't technically offer honours. It ended with a conversation. She said, "Very well, Peter. Now, you will do a proper day's work when you're in the Lords, won't you?" which he assured her he would. Well, there are many other aspects of Peter's life which you will hear about today. But the true significance of it, I think, is something which he himself felt very strongly, which was that people rise or fall in the world because of their aptitudes and their attitudes. That's true for individuals. Not in every case. People are the victims of bad luck. Everybody knows that, of course. But in most cases, and that's true for peoples as well as for people. And it is that his life is an illustration of that, as well as an expression of his own belief. Now, having said those few words about the remarkable man, let me introduce the first of our distinguished speakers. This is Professor Deirdre Nansen McCloskey. She is the Distinguished Professor of Economics and of History Emerita. In fact, I can sum up what you will read in the program as saying Professor McCloskey is a multi-purpose academic in economics, in English, in communications, and in a range of other questions. Her work is, I think, distinguished by the same kind of attention to empirical facts as Peter's was, and I think we will learn a great deal about Peter because of her particular focus on that approach. So without more ado, let me stand aside and invite Professor McCloskey to address us.